Good morning. Let me start it. Good morning, everybody. Now you are heard. Thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am grateful to see you all in the room this morning. Hopefully, we'll get some more to join us. And if not, we is who we supposed to be, and I'm grateful for it. So, welcome to our session this morning. I'm going to try and do this from there. We go. We are here for It's All in Us, and thank you. Or It's All in Me, but now it's all in we because that's my preferred pronoun. You can use that. She, her, we, because we are all together. So, I'm Dazon Dixon Jallo, and I am the founder and president of, among a whole lot of other hats that I wear, I'm the founder and president of Sister Love, located in Atlanta, Georgia, as well as in Johannesburg in South Africa. In addition to Sister Love, that's a 34-year-old women's sexual and reproductive justice organization working at the intersections of HIV and sexual and reproductive health rights and justice. I'm also a godmother to the reproductive justice movement. I keep telling people that, but for an interview with the INS, which is now ICE, but back in the day, but for an interview with the INS, because my husband was from Senegal and he was an immigrant, I would have been the 13th person in that room in Chicago when the 12 black women who sat together and coined reproductive justice as a new reality, a new way of building a movement around our sexual and reproductive health and our rights, but not only that, about our dignity and our issues around equity and inclusion, as well as in being able to bring intersectionality into the reproductive health and rights space. I'm a co-founder of Sister Song, which is known as the National Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. My organization is one of the 16 that started that organization. I only give you that because it's been just almost 30 years that reproductive justice was coined. It took about 20 years for reproductive justice to make its way into the mainstream. So I can tell you for those proud moments when you can hear somebody on the news, or you see somebody giving an interview, or I'm listening to a presentation and somebody uses the terminology with understanding around what reproductive justice is, that it's a signal and it's a sign that it not only is getting out there, but it's also resonating. And a part of that is, I think, three things. One, because we're intersectional people, we live intersectional lives, and the way we change things has to be an intersectional approach, period. That's one. Two, this intersectionality can't be understood without the stories that live them. And so the power of the story, the lived experience, where we come from, and how we get here are really important pieces to understand about how you frame reproductive justice. And there's a third one. Anybody ever heard of a thing called Black R&B? No. R&B is black. Y'all feel me? It comes from our people, it comes from our culture, it comes from our stories, our lived experiences. Doesn't matter who sings it. Doesn't matter who plays it. Doesn't matter who produces it. Or even doesn't matter really, unless you're an artist, who makes money off of it. Nobody will ever question where R&B comes from, who R&B comes from, and what it means to us. There's no such thing as black reproductive justice. Reproductive justice is black. Y'all feel me? So when you engage it, when you incorporate it, you will also bringing in the stories, the culture, the lived experiences, the leadership, the role, right, that intersectionality plays in black women's lives and all our diversities. And that's where RJ starts. That's the most important point. So I'm really grateful to have the conversation we're having today with some really cool people. We've got Vati. Vati, I'm going to ask for your forgiveness before I can get permission to mess up your name. So Vati Poitvian?
And it is Vati. My last name doesn't matter. We all
Give
sisters
thanks and
here. So
praise.
just
Thank you
call me
very much.
Vati.
You know, both my last names belong to men that I love, my dad and my husband. So I'm Dazon. Thank you very much. And we also have, thank you, Vati. We have
You're
Danielle
welcome.
Campbell. And we also have the very wonderful Marnina Miller as well. They can tell you their own stories as we engage in our conversation this morning. The way we're going to run this is we're going to have some conversation for a little bit. We've got some questions that we want to ponder. And then, with all due apologies, I got to be on the next thing at the luncheon today, so I got to be across the hall to rehearse at 10 o'clock. Sorry. So I'm going to have to run. And but the wonderful Deasha, who is our intrepid leader of the Act Now End AIDS Coalition, will carry us through your conversation, right? So this is an expert room. We're going to run it as organic as we can, but making sure that your thoughts, your voices, and even your stories are brought into this space this morning. Are we together?
Yes.
In South Africa, when somebody says, "Are we together?" the whole room, almost in harmony, goes, "Yes, we are." Are we together?
Yes, we are.
Let's get started. So I'm going to just jump right in. I think because we've been dealing with this question for the last, well, for a very, 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 very long time. But since the Dobbs decision with the Supreme Court, this has been on everybody's minds and lips and hearts, and in some instances, feet, because we're still in the streets. But how do you define bodily autonomy, especially within the context of women's sexual health and our experiences with HIV? Right? That's the first question. And I don't know what order you want to go in, but I'm going to defer to the web. Vati, you want to take that first? How are you working with bodily autonomy?
You know, part of what I want to focus on today is how is it that we're still talking about that in 2023, particularly with HIV? Because as as a society, we actually conquered HIV quite well, didn't we? And the results are that there's a portion of American society, at least, that is doing quite well with HIV. And there is a portion of American society, and I talk about us, Black women, that is still being affected disproportionately by HIV. Um, when I was preparing this, I went back to my old slides and I realized that in 2007, I did a presentation called HIV in Women. And sadly, I could almost use this, if we were using slides, use those slides. Um, we we have been, I don't want to use the word victim, but we have not benefited from the advances in HIV care. We have not been the owner of our future. And we have not been served well by my community. I'm a doctor. I didn't introduce myself, by the way. I'm Vati Pandya. I'm the chief medical officer at Housing Works in New York. And as women, we have been subject of this HIV experiment, and that needs to change. So I don't have an answer truly. What I have, it's a state of fact, as women, that needs to change. I hope I answered your question.
Well, and we have to use the mic so that you can hear me. So, I think in a lot of ways, when we think about bodily autonomy, we're often talking about it in terms of our choices or our decisions. But I do think that there's something to be said about how the systems do or do not respect our
Yeah,
bodies, period.
yeah,
Right? And so
yeah.
I think you did answer it. Thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome, because it's not a partner. You see, that's why I want to bring it out. It's not, a partner. It's not, no, it's the system that is making a subject that is
Yeah.
still Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, and I got one that just came up for me. But let's keep moving.
You want to say it before it leaves your brain?
I'm going to write it down 'cause
You sure?
that's how I've gotten to in this age. Yes. So,
I like to try to get it out as soon as it comes
you
because
know
within
me.
nanoseconds.
You know me.
Uh-huh.
I actually experienced what we call mental pause. Okay, so I'm not the only one, right?
No.
Just saying.
I'll go next.
Some people call it fog. I'm like, nah, I know what this is. Okay, so Danny. Marnina, please give us your contextual experiences around bodily autonomy and how you see that in our work around women's HIV issues.
Okay. So I'll always bring my intersection into the room when I talk about anything. I am a woman that is living with HIV. And that's very important to this concept around body autonomy because it wasn't until I got diagnosed as a younger woman my freshman year of college that when I came into this HIV movement is when I first heard the words body autonomy. Now, my mother did talk to me about making sure that I wasn't, that I was protecting myself, that I was safe while having sex. However, I never heard the words body autonomy to put a framework to it. And so once I got into this movement, I went to the youth initiative here at MAC at USCHA, and I heard the words body autonomy from Louis, who was working at Advocates for Youth at the time. And so he simply said that your body is your body. This is your body, and nobody can do what it to you what you don't want it done. And that was the description of body autonomy for me at that time. And so I took it a step further, and I thought about the fact that when people living with HIV get an HIV diagnosis, our body autonomy is immediately stripped from us. From the treatment adherence piece all the way down to HIV criminalization, and recently down to the discussions around chest and breastfeeding. All of these things really impact the way in which we're able to use our own bodies. I can speak for myself in Texas. We do not have an HIV criminalization law. However, we do have sentencing enhancement. So in Texas, my body is seen as a deadly weapon. So whatever I do with my body is automatically, according to the government, considered a toxic being. And so I think when we think about body autonomy and people living with HIV in this movement, we have to bring in their intersections when we're talking about it. And we have to think about the fact that people living with HIV don't have body autonomy according to the government. We don't have body autonomy when we're talking to case managers. I was just talking to a case manager about why they should not be inside of talking about why they should be talking about treatment while a person is trying to receive housing. If I'm thinking about trying to get housing, there's no way that I'm thinking about treatment. I need to get housing first so that that's off my mind because I need a safe and comfortable place to stay. Maslow's hierarchy of needs tells us that a person's need to have a stable house is way before any of their medical issues. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that when we're talking about HIV, they immediately want us to talk about treatment, but we're holistic beings and there's so many intersections to a person's life before we even get to treatment.
And if I'm a black woman and a mother, those intersections extend to my children.
Yes.
Right? Because then there becomes the concern not only for my body autonomy, but because I am that backbone, I'm that responsible person, I'm that person who nurtures and is deeply engaged in shaping and raising other people, that understanding how I move in this health engagement and in this space includes that other intersection. Because I love how we talk about, there's all these single mothers or single-headed households, how we put people in these boxes, how we use these, how we use the data, one, and then how we use what we call statistics as another. When we talk about behind every statistic, there is a story.
There is.
You got to understand that that story for the black woman extends in a different way, right? So just being the moniker mother, unpack that for me before you define me, right? Because there's a lot that comes with that first, and that's where I'm going to live and breathe. So understand what that means in terms of my so-called behavior when I show up. Or when I don't show up, and why I don't show up. Thank you for that.
And even when we're talking about, I want to say too, even before we talk about like I know we're talking about women living with HIV,
Yeah.
but what about the sisters that are negative that are trying to get on PrEP?
Okay.
There are so many barriers for women accessing PrEP.
That's
and the people love to say, oh, look at the statistics, Black women aren't taking PrEP, or women in general, or if people assigned female at birth aren't taking PrEP. They don't see themselves in preventative ads around PrEP.
Or paradigms of risk.
And then they're even giving risk assessments once they do go try to access that PrEP. And if they don't fit in certain risk categories, they're not able to get it. Or the legislation that's around trying to access that PrEP.
That's body
We can have a whole. I know that there are a lot of conversations. That is body autonomy.
Right.
There are a whole lot of conversations happening around that PrEP question, but in this context, it's helpful to put it in this larger framing of sexual and reproductive health and rights,
Yes.
and justice, right? Because it
missing
hasn't
piece.
been there, right? Danny.
So think about all the things that you all just heard and put that into the context of clinical research. So it's, these disparities are compounded when you look at who's participating in research, and as a result, who will have access to the advances that are generated from that research. So I spend a large majority of my time trying to get academicians, scientists, and other folks in extremely beneficial positions to our work to understand that it is not just about a research question. It is about bringing in these theoretical models, social ecological models, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, intersectional frameworks to understand why people who are disproportionately impacted by HIV are not in clinical research, and what that means for, what the implications are for cure, treatment, and prevention. If I don't have access to the clinical research, then I won't have access to the benefits. It's, an A to B type conversation, but you can't, folks who have not lived this life, who are not in the margins, can't process what it means to understand the social behavioral implications of why the numbers look the way they look.
Yeah. So that actually leads right into the next question, and thank you, because there was the question that came in my mind that I wrote down, because I'm that aging. Aging happens to all of us. Is in the context of body autonomy and in this reproductive justice space, there have been some changes, and you can talk about that if you like, Danielle, but or anyone actually, including Doc, if the idea that body autonomy is individualized, there's also a conversation that could be had around the collective body, right? And what is that autonomy? What does that look like in terms of a people? And in this instance, when you talk about PrEP and engagement, particularly in prevention studies that have never, HIV prevention studies,
Yep.
there's not a single person who is a cisgender identified woman in the United States who's ever participated in a PrEP trial.
Yeah.
Talk about body autonomy. Understand why that is.
Right. And what it has taken, because there's some changes coming, so what it has taken to move to that point where we have to shift the paradigm of science and say, all the ways that you identify what makes a study beneficial, what makes a study powered, what makes a study effective, can change when you look at the lived realities and how you organize that in a way that the same way you do the clinical research with hundreds of thousands of women of African descent on the continent, shift that around to figure out how to include women elsewhere. So recently, we talked about what's new and what needs to be new. And I think some of this has come through in some of the recent studies that are showing, for example, around the use of long-acting injectables in women and girls, and blaming the failure on these studies, again, like in the microbicides field,
Absolutely. That was
on
an
the
absolute
participants.
travesty.
So I
Absolute
asked this question. I said, well, how often are you researching how the systems within the context of doing these clinical trials are failing? right? How do we know that once they show up at your sites, that they're getting all of the respect that they deserve, that their stories are heard, and that their stories matter to that study? So the question, that was a long way to it.
But you got there. You
The
got there.
question really is around how can research and policy play a different role in advancing the cause of body autonomy when we're talking about research, when we're talking about examples of inclusion in a way that recognizes and dignifies that lived experience.
So it starts with the informed consent process for me, or even before you get to that point. Clinical research should be designed with the end user in mind. We often start with a research question, not necessarily who the folks are that we want to participate in the study. It's an individualized decision to want to participate in a study. Simply because I can become pregnant, that should not be the chief consideration as to whether or not I can participate in a study and continue forward. And a lot of that happens in research, which is why you don't see women in trials. Simply because you can become pregnant, you are a risk to our timeline, you are a risk to us being able to enroll in studies. You know, that's where these pervasive conversations around women and people of pregnancy potential being messy or difficult to enroll in studies. But when you think about paradigms of equity and justice and how that interferes with body autonomy, this is where the conversation starts. It's where the rubber meets the road. The conversation is carried forward from research to then policy in terms of what you can access for treatment and prevention, and then ultimately for cure. If cure hasn't been tested in the bodies of people who can become pregnant, guess who won't have access to a cure when it becomes available? Those same people.
Vati, you want to come in on this one?
Oh, for sure. This is really part of what I'm super interested in. So, I would say this first we here talking about women not being included. So we realized that, again, I want to talk about American society, that first, the lack of inclusion in women in general, forget about it. They're not going to include Black women, because this is a double whammy for anyone writing studies. When we've seen so many studies, even if they include men, they don't include Black men. So now they don't include women, and certainly would not include Black women. But that's really a reflection of how women are seen in our society. That's a reflection of how Black women are treated in healthcare. You know, part of what, and at the end, I'll try to talk about, holistic care, patient-centered care. This is, we are at another level. We're talking about, clinical study, but even in the day-to-day care of women, we are not considered full being. We are not, the only reason I remember being in so many meetings and raising my hand and saying, women have sex, because we were talking about PrEP and we were only talking about men, because women sexuality is tied to reproduction. We are only important as much as we can carry another being. So if we're not coming for obstetrics, if we're not coming for care of pregnancy, our sexuality is completely ignored. And the idea of including a woman in a PrEP study, you first need to, blow your mind and remember that women have sex, women are sexual being as much as men. And I think it is so crazy that in 2023 we talk about a society where it is hard for us to admit this. That, we're not going to change that. We just need to break the barriers and come into and have the voice of women, the voice of the consumer, the end user. And I think that's why something like what we're doing today is so important, because we really need the participant. We need women that are HIV negative. We need women that are HIV positive to be the voices.
Yeah.
And break down those barriers, because we're not going to change, that patriarchal mindset.
Yeah. it also brings to mind that there's this emerging, and we've been working at it for years and years, about shifting what we mean when we say community engagement, not only in research, but in all of our work, in our programs, in our policy work, in our advocacy work. What does that actually look like, and what is that? It's not on?
You gotta pick it up.
Oh. Y'all know I do radio. I try to sit my mic just like that. So, in terms of how community engagement gets defined or redefined, right? I'm one of those that will tell you first off, community engagement belongs in community, with community, by community, for community, with the resources that are meant for community. I think it's still a really odd space to be when the research site is the coordinator of the community engagement. How'd that
That's
work?
odd.
How'd that work?
It's odd.
I don't want to leave Marnina out on this question around the inclusion in research. And there's a follow-up to that, which is, are there any examples of where this is actually being addressed, where things are changing and what we're seeing as a result of those changes, if at all?
Oh, can I answer a mixture of both?
Do what you got to do.
All righty.
Bring it.
So a real cool study that I heard of from actually my provider is the Ebony study. And I think that it's important that I say that she is a Black woman who is doing infectious disease work in the South. In Houston. And so she's been doing it for a while. And so I really, really like the fact that my provider understands the complexities of me as a Black woman. And also she's working on this research study around the Ebony trial, which is a trial that is looking at the intersections of long-acting injectables and Black women.
Okay.
So she's looking at the wide array of Black women. So not just women who were assigned female at birth, but also our trans sisters as well. So she's looking at both of those intersections and seeing how that long-acting injectable responds to their body over time. And it is with ViiV Healthcare, and it's like a 2-year study. And so I'm super excited about that because she understands community in a ways that a lot of providers don't. And so I think that involving folks in clinical-based research at the beginning, because they know what's best for them in their communities. They know if childcare will be needed. They know, and that's why, even this conference is visible of that. It's visible that Black women had a hand in this conference because for the first time they had childcare at USCHA. And so even an example of that is how the Well Project was able to overturn the guidelines for the CDC around chest and breastfeeding. It wasn't until last year until we even, got the CDC guidelines to say, yeah, women living with HIV should be allowed to do breastfeeding. But also it was the inclusion of Cece Colvin, who works with the Well Project, who was talking about chest and breastfeeding as a woman living with HIV, and she documented her journey. And so not only allowing us to participate in the research trials, but involving us before it even starts, and involving community members, and also coming back to that said community after the research has been conducted and telling
That's
them
the
what
thing.
the
That
research
part.
entailed.
I had a participant in a session yesterday, or I had a participant in a session yesterday who had participated in a research trial, a notable research trial called Reproductive. She said she had participated in a study. I asked her if she had heard about the results that were published in this prestigious journal that was shared around the world. She said she hadn't even heard from her site about any of the results that were shared from that study, which I think is a huge disservice.
That's right.
When you talk about building trust in already marginalized and minoritized communities. That is why if you overcome all of the hurdles that we've discussed, you talk about building trust, that contributes to the
right.
mistrust and distrust about why people don't participate in research.
So thank you for that, Danny. So you remember I just said that never has cisgender in particular, cisgender women in the United States been able to participate in a clinical prevention, HIV prevention trial, right? There was a study called the ECHO trial that was conducted looking at it was a question around, does Depo-Provera actually have an impact on HIV? Does it increase vulnerability to HIV if I'm on Depo and I'm not living with HIV? And if I'm living with HIV, does it increase transmissibility because of Depo, right? So it was a really powerful study. It took over 3 years just to convince people that it needed to be funded to be done, right? especially since
Talk about it.
80 to 90% of women in sub-Saharan Africa who are on contraceptives are on depot, right? Because that's what's free and offered by most governments. The second one is when you talked about pregnancy, that I think is also an important
Say
piece
it.
that has changed, is that, and this was a 7-year process, I think,
Yeah.
was in 2020 now, a group called the Phases Working Group first came out with guidelines on how to make sure that you can have a clinical trial, prevention, treatment, or otherwise, that does not necessarily exclude people who could be pregnant. It must, here is how you will value that. And it starts with, what was our first question about?
Body
It starts
autonomy.
with giving the individual the opportunity to choose if they want to be included or not. It's up to them. That's the first one. Because whether they fall pregnant, that's what we say inside that. In Africa,
How do you? It's
you fall
terrible.
pregnant.
You fall on the ground and come up pregnant.
So I said that just to get that from y'all.
Terrible.
But so whether you find yourself pregnant or not wanting to be on a long-acting reversible contraceptive, not wanting to be on high-impact or long-acting, which means for most people, if they were in their years that they could become pregnant and they wanted to be in a study, they actually had to be on an IUD or on depot or something of that nature in order to stay in the study. That's not necessary. And it's included in these guidelines to say, and here's how. You make sure that you can include people and not exclude them when they become pregnant. Because that's the other
big
thing. When they become pregnant, you kick them out the study.
But you just say you're going to follow them forward. What means what?
Whatever. And then you find out years later, oh, we need to know how this drug actually impacts people who are pregnant. Duh. So these are some of the changes that I see happening. And it is because, not just because there's community, I want to be recognizing this too, but because of the women who are researchers and who are involved in designing these studies as well, have made this possible, right? So, okay.
Using COVID as an example.
Yeah.
Right? When COVID hit, you didn't understand how whatever treatments we could find, would work in pregnant bodies.
Right.
So you have, an amplified opportunity for more folks to die if you didn't include them in clinical research. That's a success of what it means to change paradigms around body autonomy. So pregnant folks were included, and their fetuses, by the way.
So we just talked about this in general. Thank you for that, Danielle. We just talked about this in general, but now it's about your stories. And would you mind, please, Vati, sharing a success story or a personal experience that highlights the positive impact of advocating for body autonomy, especially in the context of HIV?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think for us, something something that we started doing, I'm not going to talk about housing works because that's where I practice medicine, and that's we think that we've made some strive in this, is that years ago, and I can say exactly the date, it's not that old, that's 2017, we really looked at ourselves, and we realized that, and PrEP was the clinching. No, we realized that PrEP had been approved in 2012, and we were not successful, and it was really, wait a second, it was not successful in our community. PrEP works very well. PrEP is a life-saving, but PrEP wasn't, we were not getting successfully our patient on PrEP. The number of patients we had on PrEP was very, very small. And worse, very, very few women on PrEP. When we looked at the data, this was across the US, where PrEP awareness was low, but PrEP prescriptions in women were even lower. So we started to think about how is it, and that came at the same time of U equals U, where we were talking about, being undetectable, and we realized the language that we had and the way we address sexual health and sexuality in our practice was still stigmatizing. And we really looked at developing a more patient-centered, holistic approach. That was sex positive, that was body positive. That included truly training providers, because when we met our patients, the first thing we would talk about were STDs, viral load suppression. And I think Marina said something, I loved it. My case manager, all they want to talk about is, they want to talk about viral load, they want to talk about medication, but they don't want to hear anything about me. And I think that was something we started to look at that and train providers, train our case managers to be able to take a sexual history, to be able to talk to people about sexual wellness. We really developed a sexual wellness program that allowed our patients to have a voice and talk to us about their sexuality, not in the context of do you have an STD, and eliminate some language about unsafe sex practice, which we eliminated those languages, and really just try more an open-ended approach where we would let patients express where their trouble were, what they needed from us versus what we needed them to achieve. That was quite successful in the clinics in bringing the patient to us and their voices, and in starting to develop a better PrEP program and increasing PrEP prescription. I would say this is still in progress, so I cannot, start.
You say stay tuned.
The confettis, because we still feel that there is a lot of work to be done in our clinics that are, for example, in East New York, where we have a large African American population, where there's a lot of us. We still don't have as much PrEP prescription as we should. I am hoping that cabotegravir. I don't want to plug medications here. I'm hoping that the long-acting injectables can be helpful. A lot of my female patients that want to try PrEP are concerned about the daily pills. Despite all the talk we've done about bodily autonomy, people are concerned about having medication in their house that a partner could notice. And I think this allows my patient to come to me and have their injection as they would have a depot injection, and be able to be free of scrutiny.
Yes.
So again, some progress. But no champagne yet.
No champagne yet. Okay, that's a t-shirt.
So in hearing that, it raises a couple concerns for me though, because when we look at some of the data, it says that like 11% of people who could benefit from PrEP have actually been prescribed it. So to me, I hear provider backlog. I hear implicit biases.
Yes.
And if folks aren't being prescribed oral PrEP, what makes you think they're going to be prescribed injectable PrEP? Are we not carrying that forward, or is it just me? Am I tripping? Because I'm feeling away. Like, if you can't give me a prescription for oral PrEP, why should I believe you're going to give me something for injectable PrEP? We really should be addressing the systems and social structures that keep body autonomy and choice away from people, not simply the science. We understand that PrEP can prevent HIV. What we don't understand are the structural and social factors that prevent people from getting it when they want it.
Right. Hence, some of the times the studies need to be about the systems, not about people.
Yes, my God. So we've researched bodies until we can't research them. Let's look the other way for just a moment and look at the structural systems that fail people.
I just, Marnina, I don't know if you wanted to come in on that one or.
I did.
Please
I
do.
do.
Please do.
So when I think about that, I often think about community-based research when I'm thinking about making sure that we're inclusive of folks in all communities.
You speaking my love language.
For real. Okay, okay. So I'm just getting into the research space, the community-based
please.
research space.
Welcome.
I'm really excited about it. At Southern AIDS Coalition, I'm the Community Outreach Associate, and so most of my work really revolves around talking to people living with HIV, doing advocacy work and activism work. However, I do run a couple of our interventions, and one of them that I really love is Unity Workshop. Unity Workshop is an online intervention where we're looking at the intersections and the implications of internalized stigma and HIV in people. And we're talking about the effects of the mental health of people living with HIV. So it sounds really wordy, but what I really do is I get on Zoom and I really have a conversation with folks. And we'll start off talking the first week, because it's a 5-week intervention. The first week we'll just start off light. We'll talk about how they view themselves, how they view stigma, how that impacts their life. Then we start talking about those deeper intersections, start talking about how relationships impact that. What about disclosure? So we start talking about strategies of disclosure. And if it's a group that's really advanced, then we talk about things around like policy and legislation and how those things impact their daily health and their daily life. And also there is a woman on there. She is a friend to community, someone who a lot of folks in community trust. And so they sit on the call and they listen to what me and the folks are talking about. They'll take the research back to Duke University and really look at the implications of talking about body autonomy, talking about loving themselves. And at the end of the intervention, folks really have a better sense of how to go about using the tools and strategies to make sure that they're not letting all that stigma weigh them down and stigma impact their treatment adherence. So it's a different way to do things. However, I think it's really cool and innovative. And I think we have to start implementing that type of community-based research where folks don't feel so stressed about filling out all of these bubbles inside of just a regular, a regular test, making sure that we're having conversation with people, conversations with our community members to talk about research in a different way.
No, I'm with you. I much would rather have a 45-minute conversation with Kindred than fill out a survey for 45 minutes.
Right,
That's
Good old
the thing.
survey. Now
That's
they
the
put them
thing.
on the iPad. While you wait, here you
That's
go. 100 questions.
So, I want to, because a lot of the conversation that happens at this meeting and in a lot of our spaces where we are is how does any of this get us to the end of HIV? Really, because that's where we're sitting nowadays with the EHE and with these other strategies, whether they're local or whether they're federal, somewhat maybe kind of funded efforts. And I just wanted to make sure that we bring into the space that Act Now End AIDS is a really powerful coalition that is unique in its construct, in that we are community working in partnership with health departments in a coalition on figuring some of this stuff out together. Because for so long there is this us and them approach. And it's not that. We are all a part of a community. One of my best friends, no, she is the very, very best friend. So Loretta, let me make sure she doesn't hear she's one up. My very best friend, period.
Because it's recorded.
That's right, Loretta Ross. She talks about how, people who are thinking the same, saying the same things, doing the same thing, and heading in the same direction, that's a cult, right? We see it in practice right now. Without thought, that's a cult. But if you're thinking differently, you're approaching differently, you're coming at it differently, and you're moving in the same direction, that's a movement, right? And so how are we looking at the work from Act Now End AIDS is as a movement towards the end of HIV. It's not a process towards the end of HIV. And in that movement, before EHE even came along, we had our own national strategy of how we can end this epidemic. The difference between what that strategy said and did And what the EHE said and did was it included all the intersections. EHE, now it's happening differently in different jurisdictions locally. I understand that because there are some communities who are deeply engaged and are changing what it looks like on the ground. But if you read the initial EHE plan, it didn't have housing. It didn't have mental health and well-being. It didn't have sexual and reproductive health and rights protections.
Period.
It didn't have approaching gender and sexual equity in terms of identity and experience and expression. So this notion of intersectionality and the full story of it is how we get to the end of this epidemic. And I'll throw in that you don't get to the end of this epidemic without making sure that it's centering people, as Vati has said, that we're checking language, as Vati has said as well, and that in terms of what you're saying is it's also starting with and inclusive of not what we mean by community engagement, but with community leadership. I'm good with community-based research. I'm really a part of community-led research.
I think that's the difference, and we should really unpack what that means very briefly before you sail past it at 10. The difference between the two, no ma'am, that is your story. I'm gonna let you tell it. Community-led, community-based, and I'm gonna add to that, well-funded, adequately funded.
That's right. Yeah, so.
And I think before
yeah.
you go on, Days,
No, that's fine.
the EHE plan was not created with us in mind because the EHE plan was created by the previous administration.
That part.
They had no inclusion of people of color. There was no inclusion of women. The EHE plan was created by white cisgender men. It was not created with most of us in this room in mind. And so now we're backtracking and trying to follow a plan that wasn't based on the community that it was made to serve.
Right.
And then on top of that, PACHA at the time was disbanded by that previous administration when they created the EHE plan. So we're working backwards on a plan that was never designed to work for the communities it
Which
serves.
is insane to me.
That's a
Throw
little bit of the
goddamn
whole health
plan
system.
away.
But okay.
But I digress. But we
Work meant
really
to
should unpack what you said. That's so critically important. That needs to go on the record. The difference between the two and why they're important.
So in the last 5 minutes I got, before I turn this over to drop the mic in Deasha's hands, want to talk about forward and where we're going around this question of empowerment and equality and equity. And I will add in dignity and justice, right? Let's get to the how-to, right? So what are some of the steps? What are some of the things that you would tell a program, an organization, someone who is a visionary or designer of these programs? What would you offer to them as steps to actively promote and protect the body autonomy, especially of women living with or affected by HIV? Who wants to take it first? What's your steps? Vati, you've already given us some great steps, especially from a clinical perspective. I don't know if you want to come in here on what you would offer to other organizations or programs or deciders.
I really want, this is the part where I want to listen. And I think that I want to listen to my two co-conspirator here, and I want to hear what they come because we talk about it. We need to put it in action. I want to hear what the ladies are saying because I want to follow. I've been learning here today. I've been listening and being happy about things that you guys have said that resonated a lot for me. And I want to hear, I'll go last with my steps and I'll check them if they're wrong.
That's standing in her truth. Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks, Vati, for that. Who wants to take this?
Yeah.
First. What are your steps? What would you offer?
I would say, I'll quote Ayanna Presley, people closest to the pain must be closest to the power.
Bingo.
And so I think implementing people who are most strategically impacted by the HIV epidemic, those living with HIV, should be at the front of any type of movement work that you're doing around HIV. You should also be hiring people living with HIV, because we are more than just folks that can do peer navigation work. We should be involved in every level of decision making in this movement. So that'd be the first step to anything that someone does around the HIV movement.
Shouldn't have to start an organization to be able to lead an
Yeah,
organization.
yeah.
Yeah, I hear you.
And if really, when we're talking about the fact that folks closest to HIV diagnosis are also people that are closest to poverty. So when we're thinking about these educational requirements that folks have to do these jobs,
Sickening.
their lived experience should be enough.
That's right. That's right. I mean, not only enough, but I think of lived experience as data.
Yes.
It is also empirical data
Yes.
Yeah.
on how things are.
Yeah.
Right. Danielle, what steps do you offer?
So I think Marnina said a mouthful. I don't have much to offer other than that. I mean, you got to send to those folks who are closest to who are in the margins. You cannot speak for someone else. Let those whose stories you hope to tell them themselves. Work in partnership. Work in partnership. That's what I'm going to say. It's time to come out of the towers, out of our offices at the FDA, and out of our offices at the CDC, out of our offices of these policymakers who are so disconnected to what happens every day in the lives of people like us. It is insane to me.
Yeah. The steps I think if I can throw my own in after all these years, the first step is to listen
Yeah.
with intention. To listen with intention. And to do it actively, which means you ain't thinking about nothing but that person's voice and what they're having to say or what we're hearing from the expressions that are coming from community. We actually created a whole program area called Source Leadership at Sister Love. And literally what we mean by that is we're getting our information, our ideas from the source. We're making sure that we have a body of people who are young, or are living with HIV, or are LGBTQIA experienced, or are surviving breast cancer. All of the intersections that we're working on, there must be people involved in our work that are living or have lived these experiences to give us what we need to create the initiatives that they want to see. So the first thing I would say the step is to listen with intention actively. And then the next step is to do something about it and make sure they're all right with what you decided to do. So that's my contribution to that. So, DeAisha, I actually have to step away before they come across the hall and snatch me like the Sandman.
Don't let them do it.
And they wouldn't try, but that's how I feel. So thank y'all for indulging me for this little hour. I'm excited to hear what you experienced with your own conversation following. Did you introduce yourself, DeAisha?
Can we give it up for our panelists and our moderator, Dazon? Awesome. Okay, awesome. And so, hi everyone, my name is DeAisha. I am the director of Act Now End AIDS Coalition. And so I do have a sign-up sheet. You can add your name and email if you want to learn more about ANIA and what we do. As Dazon mentioned, we are a coalition of national CBOs, advocates, health departments, all working together to end HIV at the intersections of how HIV can enter a person's life. So race, how you grew up, where you went to school, what you experienced. These are all factors that contribute to how HIV can enter a person's life. And so I think now we're moving into kind of a question and answer session. And I think we may have some scenarios we want to talk about. So I don't know, Marnina, if you wanted to lead that or how you want to go. Okay, do we have any questions for our panelists? So we have Dr. Vati, Danielle, and Marnina. Does anyone have any questions for them?
I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I've been living with HIV for 40 years. And my issue...
What's your name, madam?
Clarice Jordan.
Thank you very much.
And what I find AIDS service organizations that are offering research projects. Because I have been living with HIV so long and I'm aging, I have other health problems. So they will not, that automatically cuts you out of doing any research. And so it always bothers me that I can't participate in any research because of my other health problems. How do you get past that barrier, or is there nothing that can be done?
I think there's always something that can be done, right? That's where the power of advocacy comes into play. Research studies are inherently different in the questions that they aim to answer. So they may have what we call inclusion and exclusion criteria that are based upon that research question. But I think we can connect offline. I'm going to give you my cell phone number and we can chat to figure out ways to address the limitations. Because if you're willing to participate, a willing participant should be considered to the best of the ability of the infrastructure. Of course.
So my name is Tana Pardia. I am one of the co-founders of Positive Women's Network Greater Houston. And I actually sit on CFAR CAB in Houston. So, and this is just me. So don't take anything I'm finna say personal. So, and even though I don't care, I'm very unapologetic in what I do. So as a Black woman, and we're always an afterthought when it comes to research, but we are an afterthought when it comes to meaningful involvement of people living with HIV when it comes to research also. So when I first got on this cab, I was like, you sure you want me here? So, and I have really deep thoughts because I live in Texas where our reproductive rights are always under attack. But also when I think about professionals that are dealing with Black women in general, is that they feel like we don't know how to take care of our bodies. Body autonomy is really important when it comes to the healthcare system. And no white person that governs a state or that is a politician should design what is right when it comes to reproductive rights as a human being. It is a human right to body autonomy, but it is also a human right that we as Black people and Black women don't have sex any different from any other race.
I hear you there. It's also a
Yeah.
human right to benefit from the advances of scientific progress.
So
But
when we are going into these rooms and we are giving our stories, that's trauma. That's so we need to be compensated for those stories and that time. But we also need to make sure that Black women have health care, but also we have child care. Because we are leaving our jobs to come and give you our story. We need to make sure that transportation is provided for us as Black women, as any woman, all women in general. So MIPA is very important. And I want one other issue
MIPA,
that comes
can you say what it
to
means?
MIPA is meaningful involvement of people living with HIV. And when it comes to research as Black women, we need to think about anal research. Yes. Because we never know how cancer shows up in our bodies. I've been living with HIV for 23 years. I'm privileged. And I'm gonna say that I am privileged because I have health care. Everyone does not.
Thank you. Other questions before we move into the interactive component? Yes. We'll get you next.
I just wanted to kind of add on to what Marnina said. So I was born positive, and I wanted to be a motivational speaker and a dancer. My mom's like, that's cute. Like, maybe you should do something you could fall back on. So I became a registered nurse. And my whole dream was to work in an HIV clinic. And the strides and the hoops of fire that I had to jump through to get finally hired was unbelievable. How Marnina said, our life experience should be enough. But I took an extra step to be licensed, and I wasn't welcomed in my own community. I worked for a short 6 months before being let go. So, and I just think that we belong in those spaces because we can relate to the patients so much more. You know, the demeanor of my patients after I would disclose to them was just so beautiful, and just spending the time and knowing that if another nurse had walked in there trying to get their health information, they're not going to be as open with them because, oh, you can't relate, but I can. And I just think that we really do belong in these spaces more than anybody else.
I think too, Talisa, one thing you didn't disclose about is the fact that they fired you because you were in the patient's rooms more, and that you were allotting more time in those rooms because you were getting their personal stories. You were building a connection with them, and the attending physician did not like the fact that Talisa was spending so much time with the patient because they only have about 15 minutes. Providers only have 15 minutes to spend with the patient, and then they're supposed to go to the next one. And so that's body autonomy as well. The fact that you did not have the agency to spend the time with the patient to connect with them, that's an issue.
A huge issue.
Can I say something? First off, I don't know where you are. We are in New York. I need a nurse, please. That is crazy. That is crazy. I want to just say that. And there is such a shortage of nurses. If I could find a nurse that has that kind of live experience, my Lord have mercy. I will put my email in the chat. Please, I'm not joking at all. This is dead serious. This is dead serious.
I promise I will give her your information. I promise.
Oh, please,
I
please.
will.
It is such value to have that kind of live experience in someone that is professional, that can also help the patient. You know, we look for that. And I think you when you're asking for solutions, I was happy I heard exactly what I love to hear is that we need people that to be closer to the patient, that know exactly. I don't know. I tell my patient all the time, you are living with this every day. I am not. And having someone with that kind of lived experience, call me any day. I would love that. Okay, I didn't want to take the time, but I needed to say something. That's crazy. Oh my God.
Hi, I'm Shelly from
Hi, Shelley.
Ohio. Lived experience for 25 years. It's driving, just blessed. But my question is that we don't talk a lot about, and Miriam, I'm glad that you said it, was HIV criminalization. I didn't really associate body autonomy with HIV criminalization, but it's like it really is. And I don't think that we're talking enough about HIV criminalization because I think that's a lot of, stigma with it. I think it's hindering, it's really hindering a lot of people from getting tested because if you don't know, you can't get criminalized for it. And I'm like from Ohio, and Ohio has one of the worst HIV criminalization laws, and it's horrible. It is literally terrifying people from getting tested. So I want to know, how talk to you more about connecting that policy, getting that policy together to talk about that.
I think there are amazing organizations that are doing that work right now. Currently, Zero Project is a organization that's dedicated towards doing HIV decriminalization work. So I would definitely say get connected with them. And the amazing thing about the Zero Project is a organization that is spearheaded by people living with HIV. And they actually have 2 co-executive directors who are both women living with HIV. So the fact that the folks that are closest to the pain are closest to the power in that aspect, they have created this thing called the Health Not Prisons Coalition, Reproductive, which is a collective of organizations like Positive Women's Network, Zero Project, the Counter a Narrative Project, which are really working to make sure that HIV decriminalization work is done by people living with HIV. So please get connected with them. They do amazing work out there around that subject. Oh, and also the Texas Strike Force. It's an organization that was created by people living with HIV around HIV decriminalization work. Tana, who spoke recently, spearheads a lot of that work in Texas. So get connected with her as well.
My name is Teresa. Hi, and I'm from Seattle, originally from Kenya. And I just want to bring the issues of immigrant communities, especially immigrant Black women. Yesterday we were talking about the issues that we are facing when we come here, and it's really important to bring the issue of intersection between immigration and HIV services, including HIV prevention. Especially, Danielle, you mentioned about the questionnaire that we get at the clinic. You know, it's so intrusive, and we are dealing with immigration issues and documentation, and some people really feel uncomfortable answering all those questions, not knowing whether ICE will come to your house tomorrow if you're undocumented. And so this has led some of our community members not going for HIV prevention services or care and treatment. I've had some of the people connecting with me who have been in the country for 2 years and have not had any medication. So they came with like six months medication. After that, they didn't know where to go, and if they knew, they were afraid to go and get the services. Also, some people who needed PrEP, and they couldn't go get that because they didn't know the system, and we also know that the system here is so complicated. First of all, the language, when we go there, and I speak, most of the people don't understand. But sometimes I feel it's in the mind. You tune your mind not to understand what I am saying. Because if English is your language, then if you speak Swahili, in some ways I'll be able to get it. But I don't understand how someone will not. I hope you all understand what I'm saying.
We do. Continue on.
No, I'm just trying to get the cue, like, yeah. So people do understand. And so that turns someone off, and they wouldn't continue the conversation. The other thing is that because of cultural issues and beliefs, there are some questions when you're asked at the clinic or anywhere else, you feel like someone is, we don't discuss sex in our communities. The other thing that is really stigmatized is issues of mental health. So when you give me a questionnaire asking me, have you experienced any mental health issues? Have you been depressed? We don't even have words for those in my language, and I have to translate that in my head before I respond. So we fall under the crack for some of these interventions. So there is really need to think about the immigrant population, as the doctor said.
Mm-hmm. So those cultural considerations become very important. Hello, Ms. Gale. Those cultural considerations become very important, respectfully.
And language justice is real. We often talk about language justice when we're thinking about the fact that language may change around the HIV movement and how we speak about folks living with HIV, but language justice for people that may not be English as their first language is super important. So thank you for bringing that into the space.
Absolutely. I think we dump it into this broad term called language, but it's really culture.
Yep.
It's really culture.
I wanted to respond to what you said, sister. My name is Courageous. I'm in Iowa. I did some work with the Department of Health in my state, sister, with the project called Escalate.
Oh.
And the whole point of our project was to make sure that we brought women of color into the room to inform the intake process. And so there were women from, most of us were professionals or people who started organizations to address either Black African American or Black African immigrant refugee or Hispanic, Latino populations for domestic violence. But the intersection there was, let's make sure that people are being asked questions in an order and in a way that does not put them off so that they get the services. And so I'm wondering if, sister, what state did you say you live in? Washington. I'm wondering if maybe there might not be someone that you could speak to in the Department of Health in Washington, because there may be some work being done there that you could influence to bring those same types of awareness to the conversation, because NISA is an organization that does African immigrant and refugee, and some of the very same things you were saying, they said them in that meeting, and the intake questions are different now to address that. So I think they just need to hear from you. And if you want to talk to me afterwards about how to get connected, or if you want me to help you connect to the Department of Health in Washington, I'm happy to do that. But I think that's what's missing there. Like you guys were talking about, the people who are closest to what's going on need to be closest to the solutions. I am sure that there are people in the Department of Health that even if all they're wanting to do is check the box and look good, you can help them do that, and you can help address that problem for your community.
And shameless plug, that Escalate training is coming to Seattle, Washington, April the 22nd through the 24th. So please come check it out. Tell your organizations about it. It is a training based from MAC, and it is a national-based training that any organization can sign up for. So definitely check it out, because I think that Escalate could really help with that language justice piece.
Other questions before we move into the interactive component? Feedback? All right, on we go.
All right, y'all. So we're going to do an interactive scenario discussion activity. So I'm going to break y'all into 3 groups. You could just stay where you are. I'm going to give a piece of paper to y'all. So we're going to explore how individuals make reproductive choices while considering HIV prevention and related challenges. So the instructions are, please pass them out. Oh, yep, it's 3 different ones. There you go. So I want you all to see the scenario, and inside of the scenario, you're going to look at what are the challenges and considerations when thinking about the individuals in this study. Yeah, that whole row could be one, that whole row can be one, and that whole row can be one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're going to look at the scenario. You're going to think about what are the challenges and considerations around this individual in this study and their reproductive choices in HIV prevention. And you're also going to talk about how can they make informed decisions that are both prioritizing both their aspects of HIV prevention and their well-being. So the questions are actually at the bottom of each scenario, and you'll just have someone report back in 10 minutes. We're going to just look and see how we would make these reproductive justice conversations different.
All right, do we have representatives from each of the respective areas to provide feedback? Okay, I see a hand right here.
Marissa.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Okay, let's give you a mic, Deja. Can we get her a mic, please? We need, because they're recording in the back. They're going to
Recording in the back. Okay. I don't
punches. No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Just making sure.
All right.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marissa Gonzalez. I was with Group 2. Hey, Group 2. Okay, so our scenario was, and I'm doing that, right? I'm reading our scenario? Okay. Our scenario is access to contraception and HIV prevention. So Maria is a young college student who identifies as non-binary and uses them/they pronouns. They recently started taking PrEP. Everybody knows what PrEP is, yes? Okay. To protect themselves from contracting HIV. They are also sexually active and rely on a specific brand of birth control for contraception. However, their health insurance plan recently stopped covering the brand of pills that work best for her. They now face the dilemma of either switching to a different birth control method or paying out of pocket, which could be a financial burden. So our first question is, what are the challenges and considerations the individual in this scenario face regarding reproductive choices in HIV prevention? So a few of the topics that we selected as far as challenges are a financial challenge because they're a college student, facing potentially discrimination because now they're having to switch the medication that they have found that works for them, which that medication may be primary for them because it may be allowing for some type of hormonal management. Transportation may be an issue, pregnancy, emotional labor, and potentially authenticity. I don't know what that says. Sorry, I can't even read my own handwriting. And then finding maybe potentially a new provider or looking for ways to help pay for that medication. The second question is, how can they make informed decisions that prioritize both aspects of their health and well-being? So finding a provider to help navigate the circumstances, utilizing campus resources, outreaching to community groups, finding a Planned Parenthood or a federally qualified health center, or potentially looking into some pharmaceutical discounts that may be available for that birth control. And then the final question is, are there any state laws, federal legislation, or other intersectional societal barriers that could potentially affect the individual in this scenario? So some of the things that we came up with is that some states, Ohio specifically, does not allow for payment of birth control. Sometimes. There could be the issue of if they are under the age of 18, they could be there could be a consent issue. They're in college, so they could also be on their parents' insurance. Another issue could be because they identify as non-binary, maybe finding a provider that understands and understands how to treat, and then having limited resources. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are part of Group 1. And my name is Talisa. Okay. Emma and Mark are a young couple, have recently become parents to a beautiful boy named Mark Jr. Emma, who is living with HIV, is eager to provide her child with the benefits of breastfeeding. However, they share concerns about ensuring the safety of breastfeeding without transmitting the virus to their child. They are seeking guidance to navigate this important decision, considering both the emotional and medical aspects as they explore their options. So, first question is, what are the challenges and considerations that individuals in the scenario face regarding reproductive choices and HIV prevention? So we said stigma, we said cultural beliefs, like in Africa, it's like a deep-rooted, if you're not breastfeeding your child, it's almost like you're neglecting giving them the nutrition or connection that they need. And we mentioned CPS being called for neglect or just being irresponsible. And then the next question is, how can they make informed decisions that prioritize both aspects of their health and well-being? Correct information, just making sure that it's not inaccurate, it's up to date, and connecting with other mothers who are HIV positive and are breastfeeding. And finding a provider who's aware, and the pros and cons with your partner, kind of going through how you guys feel about it, and when you go to the provider, being a united front and being on the same page when you talk to the provider. And then, are there any state laws, federal legislations, or other intersectional societal barriers that could potentially affect the individuals in this scenario? So we said again, cultural beliefs, and then provider pushback, them not being correctly educated or just kind of wanting to steer you in the way that they want to, and calling CPS for neglect and HIV criminalization.
Thank you. And last but most certainly not least.
Hi, so we had transgender health and HIV prevention. Our scenario is Taylor is a 17-year-old Black transgender woman who is exploring her reproductive and sexual health options. She's interested in accessing hormone therapy as part of her gender transition. However, she's also concerned about the potential interactions between hormone therapy and her use of PrEP, as she wants to ensure effective HIV prevention. She's navigating the complexities of the healthcare access and support that consider her transgender identity and HIV prevention needs. So some of the challenges and considerations we thought about were access to insurance, potentially being on their parents' insurance if they do have insurance, and what that would mean for them finding a provider, whether they need parental involvement or they have supportive parents. So whether they'd be able to seek services confidentially or, would need to kind of get their parents on board. Just their identity as a young Black transgender person puts them at the intersection of some of the most marginalized identities, so hard to access information and care, and the worry that they may not be taken seriously as a minor, and being able to advocate for themselves, and just the limited information on the interactions of PrEP and HRT that might be available to them. To make informed decisions that prioritize both aspects of their health and well-being. We talked about, if the concern of they're having to choose between prioritizing their identity and access to PrEP, that they're more likely to, choose honoring their identity, which could put them at risk for less safe sex. Getting them to find the right provider and, finding a location that's going to be competent and give them the information they need. And then we talked about trying to hook them up with a support group or mentor, someone who's going through the same things, and thought about if they were going to need to, or thought about looking at getting hormone therapy on the street, harm reduction services. State, federal legislation and laws. Obviously, right now there's a whole lot going on that is trying to limit access to gender-affirming care for minors. So depending on where they are, they may have a lot of barriers around that. And I think that was everything.
Thank you all so much for your participation in that. Do we have any final words from our panelists?
I guess I would say, looking at those, make sure that you're thinking about all the intersections of a person's identity. That was really the basis of that workshop, is just, or that little, scenarios, is just making sure that when we're thinking about treatment for people living with HIV, preventative measures for people that are not, thinking about all of the intersections of a person's identity when you are working with folks that are in such a vulnerable population.
Thanks. Don't be afraid to step up when it's time and step back when it's also time. Everybody's story is not your story. Okay?
Dr. Vati, do you have any final words?
Yes, I need to listen more. We need to listen more and really include. Today, for example, we talked about everything, and then that young lady from Kenya came with something that we were not talking about. So yes, listening and understanding the community we want to serve.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining our panel this morning. Can we give it up for our panelists one more time? Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Where is that sign-in? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Enjoy lunch, everybody.